Julianne. This is the time and place for the September 16, 2015 briefing session before the Utah Board of Oil, Gas, and Mining. As always, Mr. Baza, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Welcome again to your monthly meeting here in Salt Lake City. I'm John Baza. I'm the director for the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining, and we'll be starting out with our briefing this morning. We have to change the order a little bit. Dana Dean, our Associate Director for Mining, is going to give you an update on the Office of Surface Mining Stream Protection Rule. And as you recall, we have a coal regulatory program that is a primacy delegation from the Office of Surface Mining. They have oversight responsibilities for us. So as they create rules, we have to follow suit in terms of appropriate action for those rules. So Dana is going to give you a briefing on meetings she's attended and discussions that she's had.
I thought I'd start with a little background on the rule. OSM began working on this rule in 2010. At that time, they asked several states if they would like to be cooperating agencies. We thought that would be a good opportunity to get our voice in, and so we signed up in July of 2010. We participated in 3 rounds of reviews where we had 5 to 6 calendar days to review over 1,000 pages. None of our items were ever incorporated into what they were doing. They didn't seem to care if large pieces of information were missing, so we got frustrated, and the states wrote a letter to through IMCC complaining about the short time of review and the fact that our comments weren't even being considered. Back in November of 2010. We last heard from OSM in January of 2011, and because we hadn't heard for 4 years, we terminated our cooperating agency status in February of this year because we didn't want our name on this product that had nothing to do with our work. So actually they ended up putting our name on it and then putting an asterisk at the bottom that said that we withdrew, but anyway, I was upset that they did that. But they finally released their EIS and proposed rule together in late July of this year. Several states and other entities have asked for an extension of time to review the document. It's very long. The rule itself is over 300 pages. The EIS is over 1,200. Just last week, OSM granted an additional 30 days of review, saying that that should give us plenty of time to thoroughly review everything, which is extremely untrue, but we're grateful that at least we have somewhat of an extension. And we're grateful for that because we have our coal program right now is looking at a lot of large lease additions to mines, and they're very busy with permitting, and we'd like them to be able to look at this, but they have limited time to look at it. And so we're doing the best we can, but there will be things that we miss just because of the time limits. We think the rule is bad, especially for the West, where it doesn't seem to apply in many cases. They're trying to apply Appalachian situations across the country to Utah, Alaska, New Mexico, where places it just doesn't fit. Last month I went to a meeting in Herndon, Virginia with IMCC that included representatives from all of the states, and we actually sat in a hotel conference room for 3 days. We broke into 2 groups. One group was hydrology, and one group was everything else. I went in the hydrology group, and we just went through the rule line by line and came up with what our concerns were, and we put together a document that right now is in the cloud, and IMCC will be using as a comment. And that is available for our staff to kind of help direct them to what the major problems are in their comments. But I thought I'd just go through a few of the major concerns, just so you know there are a lot more than the ones that I'm mentioning. But these are some of the big ones. There's a very broad definition of material damage. It's defined now as any adverse impacts from on the quality or quantity of surface water or groundwater, or on the biological condition, and that's a new term, biological condition of a perennial or intermittent stream that preclude any designated use or impact threatened or endangered species. It doesn't say if you can mitigate it, that it's not material damage. It doesn't say if it's short term. that it's not material damage, and so we have a major problem with that. There's an extremely unrealistic riparian corridor requirement. You have to establish a riparian corridor at least 100 feet wide on each side of the stream, and that goes for intermittent and ephemeral streams as well as perennial. They don't care if there was no riparian corridor before. We spoke with the person in Colorado who was on this team. He's a hydrologist, and he tried that with OSM, and he tried to tell the people writing this that this would not work in the West. We have incised streams. We have, areas where ephemeral streams, there is no vegetation, and they just did not listen to him, and he was hoping that our comments would be taken into consideration. There are unrealistic baseline water data requirements. They would like equally spaced monthly intervals for a minimum of 12 consecutive months, which does not account, it doesn't say if you can't access this on the Wasatch Plateau in December and January, then you can skip that month. And we don't want people out there risking their lives trying to get data or getting to a frozen stream that has no usable data. So we've asked them to modify that. But another comment we're making is that the baseline data collection after those 12 months, if those 12 months were based on the Palmer Hydrologic Drought Index, if they were in a drought period or a wet period, they don't count. You have to have 12 consecutive months outside of drought or wet. That will never happen in Utah. You'll be out there 20 years collecting baseline and probably never have enough to satisfy these rules. There's a permit nullification requirement that if we issue a permit and later during a renewal, a significant revision, or any change to the permit, if we find out that some of that information was inaccurate, it doesn't say forged or purposely inaccurate, but if you find out that it's substantially inaccurate, then you void the permit and cause immediate reclamation. There's no right to appeal by the company. There's no due process. And it's very scary that they put that in. And I did ask in our meetings, I said, has anyone ever had a problem with this? And a couple of the eastern states did say, oh yeah, we've had people falsify data, And I said, well, we've never had that before, and I don't know why they want to apply this to the whole country. Why don't they just go after those bad actors? And it really seems like a lot of this is coming from some specific situations in other areas of the country where they want to punish someone, but instead of using existing rules and doing the work to get at them now, they're trying to just make it so that it applies everywhere, and it really doesn't make sense. We feel like it takes away a lot of state autonomy, and we have primacy concerns over this. There's no room for interpretation. It's all based on Appalachian science. They say throughout the Federal Register that this is based on updated science, and it's the best technology currently available, but that's all based on Appalachia. It's vague and important definitions, way too broad. It goes well beyond streams. This is a major rewrite of SMACRA. It touches almost every rule. The red line, I have the red line strikeout, and it's just every page has red line strikeout. There's nothing that they didn't touch. It's overreaching. The economic impacts are understated and important for both states and industry. They're asking for a lot of additional information that we don't feel as a state regulatory agency would help us do any better job of keeping the environment safe and reclaiming mines. For example, they're asking for a certified forester to certify vegetation plans. We have vegetative success that we can show. We've gone through 2 phase 3 bond releases just in the last year here in the state of Utah, where there was no problem with the vegetative success. They didn't have to go to the expense of finding a certified forester to do that work. And there are other things like that where it would cause a lot more money to be spent and a lot more data to be gathered that may not improve anything on the ground. It doesn't allow for differences in underground and surface mining. In fact, in some areas it talks about surface mining and is not clear as to whether it applies to underground mining. So again, it's vague and unclear. So what's next? We will comment through PLIPCO and IMCC because of the extension. Those are due around October 25th. I'm not sure. It was 30 days, so.
Our comments will be due to Flipco a week before.
Right, so we were planning to get those to Plipco the week before because we'll be officially commenting through the governor's office. And then after that, I don't know. I don't know if they'll listen. They never did before. I'm pretty sure they'll be sued if they try to implement this law, but we're really hoping that something happens that will get them back on track. I mean, if they felt like the stream protection rule needed improved, that's one thing, but they have done a major rewrite to SMACRA, and the states all agree that this is a really bad law that does not help anything. And the things that they're really trying to stamp out are really covered under the existing laws. And if OSM wanted to go after those bad actors or difficult situations, they could be doing that under the current law and not be trying to, this honestly would shut down a lot of mines. And so we see it as that's what they're trying to do, but.
I can tell you that there was a paper written some years ago by some extreme conservationists that were asking for major funding for a strategy which would take some of the most extreme governmental positions across the country and then harmonize those across the country by an extensive rulemaking process. And it's this harmonization, lack of comment, not listening, is exactly what the strategy was in this paper. So that's very disturbing.
Yeah, it was interesting. Maybe I'm getting too political here, but Alan Edwards from Wyoming commented that the day the rule came out, all of the press releases from the NGOs, they were pointing to the parts of the rule that they were happy with. And so they had read it ahead of time. But the cooperating agencies that had even stayed in and not withdrawn had not seen it until the day it came out.
That proves my point.
I think, Dana, you're wrong. They didn't read it, they wrote it.
Yeah, I'll talk to
I
you.
do have a question.
I have another incident to tell you about later about that.
Sure. Is it the final EIS or is it just the draft EIS?
Sorry, this is the draft EIS. So they
how do they
released.
release a draft, a rule with a draft EIS which hasn't had a comment?
That was another point that we're making is that is not the usual process. And they've actually insisted since 2010 that that's the way that they would do it, release the draft EIS and the rule on the same day, and which it was within a couple of days of each other, but all comments are due on both by October 25th. And just so you know, we are not commenting on, the COLD program is not looking at the EIS itself, we're looking at the rule, because we know that that's what will actually affect us. And we don't have time to go through the draft EIS, but other people in our division who usually are looking at EISs from all sorts of different sectors are looking at a broad view of the EIS, but no one will have time to go through it with a fine-tooth comb. We could probably resurrect our old comments from 2010. They're probably still applicable.
Thank you very much.
Couple of things I would mention. Dana has done a great job working with the Gold team and first of all, addressing the initial documents that were prepared for us as we were cooperating agency, but from following up on this and attending the meeting back in Herndon, Virginia, and working with the other IMCC states. From my point of view, this is the harm that we have when the federal agencies try to create a nationwide rule that applies in all areas. I believe that there's enough regional specificity offered through the primacy delegation to individual states that if they would allow us to address these issues specifically for Utah, we certainly could. And we've had a good track record of doing that. So I think, we're getting ready to talk about another topic here in a minute, which talks about a kind of a one-size-fits-all rulemaking that's being conducted at the federal level. But thanks very much to Dana for her work. We'll go ahead and return back to item number 1 on our briefing, which is an update on the state's hydraulic fracturing litigation. And I'm not sure what you recall from this, but John Robinson from our AG's office has been our point man in terms of coordinating, collaborating with the other states that are involved in this lawsuit. So I'll turn some time over to John to give you this update.
Thank you, John. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, it's good to be here. Sorry that item number 1 is going as item number later. I was waiting for everyone at the normal place, but no one came, and then I realized that I'd missed something rather important. As Mr. Baza said, John Robinson from the Utah Attorney General's office. I'm going to talk a little bit about the hydraulic fracturing litigation in federal court right now. I'd like to do 3 things. First, just kind of give you a timeline so everyone's on the same page. It'll be a little bit repetitive, so feel free to have me skip ahead if everything is clear in your mind. Then I'm going to do a little bit of a summary of the arguments and give you a little bit of a current status update, and then I'll invite any questions. And if anything, during the course of the timeline, if you'd like more details, feel free to interrupt me there as well. The end of March is sort of when this all kicked off. The BLM published in the Federal Register their final hydraulic fracturing rule on federal and Indian lands. And that was published after about 4.5 years of pretty extensive work. It's detailed, it's comprehensive. It was meant to be an update of sort of a hodgepodge of existing regulations that had never been consolidated. There was an onshore order number 2 and some other regulations, and it's trying to bring all this fracturing regulation under one umbrella, under one roof. Almost immediately in the spring, Wyoming and a coalition of industry challenged the rule in Wyoming federal court. It's actually in Casper, not in Cheyenne, is where this is taking place. And at first, the industry litigation was separate from the state litigation since the 2 cases have been consolidated. Throughout the spring, North Dakota, Utah, and Colorado worked to join in Wyoming's challenge. So it's essentially the states in the one suit and industry in the other. We were all successful in joining, and at the end of May or early June, preliminary injunction motion was filed, both by industry and by the states. Preliminary injunction is a request that asks the court to press hold on, in this case, the implementation of the rule while the litigation winds its way through the courts. So if a preliminary injunction issues, it preserves the status quo while the litigants settle their dispute and a judge rules on the case. We had a hearing on June 23rd that lasted about 6.5 hours up in Casper that addressed that preliminary injunction question. And at the end of the hearing, the judge ruled from the bench that he wasn't prepared to either deny or grant the injunction, but he did have some pretty serious concerns that were, of course, raised by the states and by industry about this rule. So he issued a temporary stay of the rule, which in effect is like a preliminary injunction, but he asked the states and industry to wait until the government filed the administrative record and then provide the court with citations to that record. Essentially, at the hearing, it was a lot of he said, she said sort of stuff because there was no record to point to. So the states were saying this, the Department of Justice was saying that. The judge sort of said, until we have the record, I'm just going to press hold and then let you have a couple weeks to examine that record. That's pretty much where we are now. At the end of last month, August 28th, the Department of Justice lodged the administrative record. It arrived on 9 DVDs. It's 33.8 gigabytes and over 600,000 documents. I think in total pages, that's close to 1 million pages. I didn't count. And that's where we are now. We're in this 3-week period where the states and industry get to look through the record and find support for their arguments, their contentions. That brief is due, or that supplemental briefing is due this Friday, actually. So I expect the judge to take 2 weeks reviewing that supplemental briefing, and then we'll get either a thumbs up or a thumbs down on the injunction. I think everyone's hopeful, of course, that the injunction will issue. The judge hasn't really turned his cards other than what he said in that original hearing, where he did have serious concerns about the rule and its effect on particularly the western states that are involved in this litigation. I'm going to turn now to a brief summary of the argument. As you know, the 4 states involved all are situated pretty differently in terms of jurisdiction. North Dakota has, I think, only around 3% federal land, where Utah is, depending on how you count it, 60 to 70% federal. And so that kind of leads to the idea that each state has a very unique position and can make unique arguments based on that position. And there's, of course, some overlap, but there's not complete overlap. For instance, North Dakota, is particularly concerned with their underground injection program and some sovereignty issues where the fracking rule kind of steps on their toes a lot. They are also concerned that if you have a stand-up 2 sections with a long lateral, and any part of that straw drains federal minerals, federal oil or gas, then the rule applies to the entire 2-section. And so those are some of the things they're concerned about. Whereas in Utah, we're sort of going to focus more on the economic issue of, imagine a situation where industry is severely slowed down in their ability to get an APD approved because of this rule. In a heavily federal landed state like Utah, that industry is just going to leave, go somewhere else, because it takes too long. It's not efficient. And so that's sort of the difference between our position, North Dakota's position. And what I provided you with is our memorandum of law in support of our motion to intervene. Pages 3 through 5 of that kind of summarize our argument. We, of course, have already been granted intervention, so the paper is moot, but it's in the public record. And there's not a lot that at this time we can speak on the record about the legal merits going forward because of confidentiality issues and things like that. But that could give you a little bit of a hint of the sorts of arguments we'll be making in the merits phase. And then finally, what to expect. The supplemental citations are due this Friday. The judge is then going to decide on the preliminary injunction, and then there's going to be a period of time where the litigants argue over this enormous record, what's in it, what shouldn't be in it, what ought to have been included but wasn't. And then there will be a merits briefing, which is actually about the legality of the rule. So this is all in the preliminary phase. The merits phase will start in several months and probably last 3 to 5 months. And this will certainly be appealed all the way to the 10th Circuit. So hopefully we'll get a good result in the lower court, and it's always easier to defend a good result than to challenge a bad result going up. Invite any questions at this time.
The judge, what's his name?
Judge Skavdal.
What's his history?
He's pretty new to the bench. He's an Obama appointee. I think he's been seated for around 3 years, but he's known to be a very careful thinker, critical thinker, and he's definitely from the West. He's interested in private property rights and understands that things in the mountain region aren't the same as on the coasts, and it's clear that he's going to give this very, very careful thought.
Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
Thank you.
Again, we appreciate John Robinson for the work that he's done on this. I should mention that Steve Alter actually is John's coordinator on this, and Steve has been very involved in this, but Steve wasn't able to be here today to get this briefing, so we certainly appreciate Steve Alter's contributions to this as well. The third item on the list is there's a schedule in your packet of proposed hearing schedule for calendar year 2016. It shows the hearing date and also the petitioner's deadline. It pretty much follows the same schedule we've always used, which is fourth Wednesday of the month, excepting the November and December hearings when we do that during the first week in December to avoid the holidays. So you might want to look at that and check your calendars. There's no action required on it at this time, but usually we will ask you in your October hearing to ratify the hearing schedule for next year. And of course, we recognize that just like this hearing, there may be occasion when we would want to change dates around, but I would point out to you that the reason we're here today is that we usually schedule the auditorium a year in advance, and because we did not have it scheduled for today, someone else had already booked the auditorium, so that puts us out here in the core facility. Having said that, I probably ought to make acknowledgement that we thank the Utah Geological Survey for the hosting this meeting in their facility and the accommodations that are being provided today. Any questions on the proposed hearing schedule for next year? If not, I'll move on to a couple of other items. I think you'll also see in your packet the schedule for tomorrow's field trip to the Skyline mine. You can see we're starting at a very early hour, trying to gather around 6:15 in the morning to depart shortly thereafter. Arriving at Skyline at 9 o'clock. We'll do the safety training in the overview, do the underground tour. I'm not sure if that'll be in the morning, before lunch, or?
It'll be before lunch.
Okay, so we'll do that, and then have lunch, and then travel back to Salt Lake. I know we're estimating that it'll be a full day, arriving back in Salt Lake at 6:30. That's just to give us a little wiggle room in terms of timing. You know, if at all possible, we'll try to get back before then, but that's what we've scheduled for now anyway.
John, our target is to get you out of there by 2 o'clock.
Okay, perfect. You'll see some other notes on there that the dress code is jeans casual. Note that we will be in an industrial operation, so you'll want to wear comfortable clothes. And, you know, the mine will provide you with safety equipment, including some boots to wear underground. You won't be able to take pictures underground, and that we've outlined the list to show only 12 people. We did check with the mine, Chris, and you're a guest, not an employee on this field trip. So you're one of our 12.
They think that way too.
Okay. So any questions on that? Okay, we'll look forward to seeing you in the morning then. Another item that I'll bring up with you is, I think you heard me talk last month about the division's budget situation, and I thought I would give you an update. We obviously rely on several types of funding. We have the federal grant funding for our coal program and our AML program. We rely on general fund and dedicated credits for our minerals program. Administration is pretty much all general fund, but in our oil and gas program, we rely on a conservation fee that is 0.2% of the value of oil and gas produced in the state. Severance tax, as you know, has the same kind of percentage valuation on wellhead value. So as prices drop, as production drops, so does our budget or our revenues for the oil and gas program. What we have budgeted for the oil and gas program for FY16 is cost of $4.35 million. In July of this year, as we did that estimate on projected revenues, we saw ourselves achieving about $4.5 million of revenue at the July period. We've recently updated that revenue estimate as of yesterday And that amount is now down to $3.94 million, which means that in the current year, we're going to have a shortfall of revenue versus expenses of $410,000. Now, I think you all know, too, that we have a small reserve fund that was established many years ago for the oil and gas program, which will allow us to cover that shortfall as long as it doesn't get any steeper. So the current year, we're probably relatively safe. We'll still do some belt tightening measures, try to control our expenses to make sure that we do stay within whatever our revenue stream is for the current year. My concern is the next fiscal year, FY17, which would start on July 1st of 2016. We have no idea what prices are going to do or where they're going to go, but we're already seeing a bit of a decline in production as operators shut in their higher cost wells and production starts to slip. And of course, there's no drilling to replace those reserves. So I'm really worried about next year. And so we're considering what options are available to us. There might have to be some kind of ask to the legislature to help us out. The problem we've seen in the past is the legislature normally doesn't help you until you're hurting. And it may be that we won't be able to plan ahead for a budget shortfall as much as deal with it when it happens and then ask for a supplemental in the 2017 legislative session. But one way or another, we'll find a way to keep the doors open, keep business running, because I think industry relies on us for those things. And that may be something that's somewhat lost on the legislature or the general public. So I wanted to give you that update. We'll keep track of this and we'll continue to update you as the year goes on, as prices change, as production changes, so that we can give you the best information that we have at that time.
Board members, any comments? I have a couple. Last week I went to the Energy Summit out in Vernal. Many of you were there. Susan Davis was a presenter and did a wonderful job. Several of the experts predicted a different scenario for the future of more cyclical, up and down, than we have seen with OPEC adding production or reducing production to normalize prices over a longer period of time. OPEC apparently doesn't want to do that as much in the future as they have in the past. So the price swings are going to be more cyclical, probably on a 2 or 3 year cycle. And so it seems to make real sense to have some sort of a rainy day fund for what for that. The money will go to other states that are ready for it. One of the realities is that the state of Utah relies on mineral revenues, mineral taxes, mineral income, mineral jobs for its overall benefit. And it's, as I read the statute, we have an obligation